Welcome for our last day of the Rosenberg Forum here. We're going to have our technical workshop today on Friday. And you should have all received an email that explains the way forward in terms of how the presentations are going to look like and what is going to happen after the presentations, because all the papers are going to be reviewed before we can submit them to the journal. But I think today is a nice platform for us to really get some presentations that explain the detail. Yeah? Yes. Yes, that's right. The email was sent to the presenters. Yes, yes. You're right. That's true. It was sent to the my apologies. That email the presenters have received. Right. Okay, we're kicking off with Nicholas and Floyd. And after each presentation, the discussant should be here to actually organize the Q&A sessions. Right. In case you have slides, you are more than welcome to show them here. Otherwise, that's microphone will suffice. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. When Jibby told me that I would have the first 40 minutes, I was really excited. Okay, some of you are awake, so you're ready. Julia has her coffee, so thank you. So my topic today is irrigation as a service. The clicker is here. There we go. Thank you. I've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting this right. Well, there's 3 buttons. That's right. I want to press the red button. Again, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. The first thing I have to do is define what I mean by irrigation as a service. And I'm going to give you a rather narrow definition for the context of this talk. So what I mean by irrigation as a service is for-profit irrigation service provision provided by entrepreneurs who are not farmers. And we can characterize it as mobile and occasional. And so this is actually a company, AgriRain, that is an Indian company that operates in India and both East and West Africa. And they have a hose reel that attaches to a tractor and gets dragged around. However, when we go around the global south, we actually find irrigation as a service operating in multiple contexts. It's typically invisible for reasons that I'll come to very soon. In fact, under the FAO definition of irrigation, irrigation as a service, as I've defined it, is not irrigation because it is mobile. And yet, presumably it provides value. There's a voluntary transaction between a buyer and a seller. And so really this thesis is, or rather this presentation, is an economic analysis of irrigation as a service. I should acknowledge Ishani Lal, my co-author of this work, is based on her master's thesis. I won't go into the details of smallholder needs around irrigation. We know that we use irrigation to buffer against temperature shocks and drought. In terms of the policy context, there's been an increasing elevation of the role of small-scale irrigation over the last 5 years as an important component of increasing well-being for smallholders in the global south. There are 2 relevant literatures when we think about irrigation as a service. One is the larger farmer-led irrigation literature. I think Ariel actually mentioned the World Bank Farmer-Led Irrigation report, and they've their most recent report, they have a manual that is several hundred pages long. In my search, irrigation as a service or service provision models come up perhaps in 1 or 2 sentences of that report. And so we might ask why that is. I do ask why that is. And the closest that I get, and I suppose the second literature is informal water markets. So those of us that have traveled and worked with smallholders know that smallholders do share equipment all the time. And a farmer-to-farmer sharing of equipment is irrigation service provision. And informal markets actually play quite a large role in smallholder resilience. However, they also are invisible from a policy context. And so the question is, Why is it that this thing that seems to be occurring a lot isn't visible? And the best answer that I can come up with is that in general, within the policy debate, we assume that the correct end state is that every smallholder will own their own equipment. And therefore, we've tended to analyze things with the end point of individual farmers owning their own equipment, which leads us to cost-benefit analysis, subsidizing the purchase of equipment by smallholders. However, from a more expansive case, that doesn't have to be the case. If the goal is increasing income or increasing welfare by some other measure, we should have a larger set of potential solutions that we look at. And so with irrigation-as-a-service, the farmer never owns the equipment. Secondly, a number of people that I come up with, that I talk to, view irrigation-as-a-service as predatory. So particularly around, many of these mechanisms are similar to urban water markets, and they are viewed as predatory, with the idea that if you have a system and you put in a middleman, some people might call them an entrepreneur, some people would call them a middleman, that they will extract all the rents from the system. And that is a valid concern. However, to me, the light bulb moment is going and talking to farmers that have told me, well, look, actually, I could buy my own equipment, but I choose not to because I'm better off renting it. And so again, I think there's an economic story there, and that's the motivation for this paper. So as far as we know, there is no other economic analysis of irrigation-as-a-service yet. So what am I going to do and what am I going to present? The paper develops a decision-making model for irrigation-as-a-service. Essentially, it's a very simple model. I'm not going to show you any equations. Those are in the paper. But we have multiple fields and one piece of equipment. And so the decision is, do you irrigate no fields, one field, two fields, or multiple fields? The equipment is such that you can't irrigate all of the fields fully. And again, that's very representative of the situation that we find if we go into the field. The basic concept we use is a crop water production function. I wasn't sure in this audience how many people would be familiar with that, so I'm going to go over it a little bit. I don't want to presume anything. And then we'll look at how the optimal strategy varies with weather, crop type, and economic parameters. And in the second half hour of my talk, I'll get to that. So actually, I'm just interested, could I have a quick show of hands? How many people are familiar with crop water production functions? Okay. So that's good, that's about half. So a crop water production function is essentially a functional relationship, in this case, between how much irrigation water is applied on the horizontal axis and your crop yield on the vertical axis. So it's a functional relationship of how the crop takes up water to produce biomass and to produce crop yield. So it is based on the underlying agronomy. Most crop water production functions have a convex portion and a concave portion, in the sense that if it's very dry, the first water that you add to a crop isn't going to do much to the yield. And then you hit a larger response, and then by the time you've reached your full irrigation, you're not doing much more. I'm ignoring waterlogging here. So technically, if you keep adding water, you'll start drowning the crop, and I'm not going to consider that. So crop water production functions are modeled in a number of different ways. We have experimental studies, empirical studies. Actually, I know some of you have done some of those. Ariel, for example, has actually done some of that work. We also have models like CropWatt or AquaCrop that can be used to model these relationships in a way that you can do larger analysis. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to use a result from Manny Ruhi-Rad and others. Manny was my PhD student. He's now at Texas A&M as an assistant professor. The basic feature of a crop water production function is that it is a monotonically increasing function. And that is also true of cumulative distribution functions. And so you can essentially take any crop water production function, however you define it, and model it using a CDF. And so then all of the math that applies to a cumulative distribution function can be used to really simplify the analysis of your crop water production function. So here I have three, this is just a normal distribution, very straightforward. I have three normal distributions. In this case, I've just moved the mean. And what I want to demonstrate is if you have a standard distribution function, you can vary its parameters to represent different crop water production functions. So in this case, the blue curve represents a crop water production function that is concave. The marginal productivity of water is always decreasing as you add more water. That would represent a case where irrigation is used only supplementally. The yellow represents a case where you really need to irrigate. And so you can, rather than going to the trouble of modeling a complicated system, you can just drop your cumulative distribution function into your model, and it goes through. It's a very convenient way of modeling. So I'm not going to show you equations. Roughly what we do is this. We have two situations. The first is the left-hand side, which is if our crop water production function is concave, we have analytical solutions, right? So we can use our standard economic models to exactly analyze solutions. The one wrinkle here is that because of the problem set up, the Kuhn-Tucker condition, so that the corner solutions turn out to be really important. And here again, we can look at yield maximization and profit maximization. Why am I focused on yield maximization? Well, partly because many policymakers, many agronomists focus on yield maximization. It makes economists lose their hair and steam comes out of our ears. So that's why we'll look at profit maximization. On the other side, if your crop water production function is non-concave, you can't come up with analytical solutions. I mean, you can, but they'll be wrong. And so if we have a concave crop water production function, the system is complicated enough that we have to use simulation methods. And again, we're just going to solve the same problem. You have one piece of equipment. In this case, I'm going to show you solutions with 3 fields. So you have 3 identical fields, one piece of equipment. And the decision is how much will you irrigate each field? So at its surface, it's a very simple problem. I'm not going to, I guess maybe I will go through the results in a little bit. So here are the results. And then I'll give you the intuition. I'll give you some graphical intuition for them afterwards. So what we care about is if we have mobile equipment, is it optimal? Under what situations is it optimal to irrigate all the fields? I guess, first of all, take a moment and look at that. And it's quite varied, right? And the intuition goes out the window, right? I wouldn't have guessed any of this. I guess I would have guessed a little bit of it at the beginning. Right, exactly. You're welcome. I am an economist. So yeah, it's not very helpful. Yeah. So what you see here is there's a lot of maybes, and they're not very logically arranged. And that's exactly right. And so the quick answer is, boy, it's really complicated. I can talk through the yield maximization. So yield maximization is just you want to produce as much crop as possible. That one's the simplest case because you will irrigate all of the fields and you will use all the water. Effectively, with yield maximization, you view water as a costless input, whether it is or not. And so you'll never let a drop of water go to waste. So you'll always use all the water. And if you're yield maximizing with identical fields, you'll actually spread the water between all of them equally. And I'll show you that graphically in a minute. So that's a standard and predictable result where you're equalizing the marginal physical product of water across all the fields. Yeah, pretty much all the other results are non-obvious. So I only have 7.5 minutes left. So I want to talk you through some of the graphics and then, or some of the intuition, and then talk about the conclusion. So this is just kind of to get everybody clear on what I'm showing. This is the 2 figures that show the results for the concave case. This is concave yield maximization. So it's the case that I just talked about. The graph on the left here they both have water available on the horizontal axis. On the vertical axis on the left-hand side, you have how much water each field gets. On the right-hand side, you have the marginal physical product. So how much additional yield you get from every unit of water you apply. It's not very interesting. And in fact, there are 3 curves on both graphs, but they exactly overlap, right? And that's because for this case, you treat every field the same. Any amount of water, you're going to split it equally between all three fields because that maximizes the marginal physical product at that point, at that allocation. So I'm showing that because it's not very interesting, but just to get everybody okay with this kind of figure. The next kind of figure I'm going to show is an example of, right, so this is the same field, same profit function. So this is a case where with a mean of 0.7, this means you actually have a fairly non-concave production function. And so again, there's not an analytical solution here, but I want to walk you through results. So we have three identical fields, and the answer is depending on how much water you have, you might irrigate 1, 2, or 3 of the fields. If you become non-concave enough, you actually might not irrigate any of the fields. In some cases, you might irrigate 2 of the fields the same and the other not at all. And so in some cases, you might irrigate your fields different amounts, even though they're identical. And so our classical economic results of equalizing the value of the marginal product across all fields don't work. So I can start looking at the red field here, field 1. Essentially, what this says is that as we get more water, we start by putting all of the water onto field 1 until it's fully irrigated. We then have a section that's up here where we have more water available. We're not putting it on field 1 because it's fully irrigated, and we're not putting it on the next field either because the marginal value produced is insufficient. At some point then, we start irrigating the second field, even while we have some on the first field. We leave the first field at full irrigation, and then we have this jump where we have a discontinuity, and we actually reduce the amount of water on the field that was previously fully irrigated. And then the same pattern repeats, where we then treat 2 fields the same and the third differently, and then we also, these 2 fields jump down. The marginal product is quite complex as well. The intuition here is that at each step you're comparing the result with n fields and the result with n+1 fields. And so the comparison of the value of the marginal product is not straightforward. Some complex and interesting results there. And again, if you add more fields, if you add different non-identical fields, of course, the complexity increases. All right, so what can we say? Well, when we look at optimal irrigation as a service, well, first of all, and I'm an economist, so probably all of these measure generally, but I want to hedge my bet. So yields and profits may increase when you move to irrigation as a service. Asset utilization may increase, and assets may not be fully utilized. So in general, there's a trade-off that we may not anticipate between your willingness to maximize your yields, your willingness to maximize your profits, and your willingness to use your assets fully. And that is one that we typically don't think about in a policy context. So if you're not using your assets fully, that doesn't mean you're not operating optimally in this case. The other thing that is interesting here is that it opens up the possibility that there are portions of the parameter space where you can move from a situation where one field is being irrigated to a situation where many fields are being irrigated and your asset utilization rate goes down and your profit goes up. Now, that is a particularly interesting case because one of our concerns in a smallholder setting is sustainability. And so as you increase your asset utilization rate, you're increasing your water use. And so to the extent that you care about long-term sustainability, asset utilization is important. And so in a sense, this is a hopeful result, which says if you manage your asset utilization, rather you should think about your asset utilization and you shouldn't necessarily think about it always as needing to be maximized. So there's 3 policy implications I want to talk about. One is to the extent that small-scale irrigation is funded by development banks and donors, we should care about the effectiveness of donor funds. And the result that I just explained, or hopefully explained, is that if we care about the return on investment, so typically donors will fund subsidy programs for individual purchase of pumps. That actually generates a relatively suboptimal return on investment compared to other potential schemes. And so to the extent that donors care about the return on investment of their programs, we should encourage them to think more expansively about how those funds are deployed. Second of all, as I started off by saying, when we look at the current status of irrigation-as-a-service entrepreneurs, they're often viewed as predatory. And in fact, they're discouraged. For example, in Rwanda, where I do a lot of work, the current subsidy program specifically excludes the ability to rent pumps that are purchased through the program. Of course, it's going to happen in the shadows, but you're actually not allowed to be an entrepreneur that then accesses the subsidized program. And so in terms of how we think about policies, it might actually be very useful to think about what are the situations and contexts in which we want to encourage irrigation as a service. Again, I haven't shown you the full results. There are situations where it works very well and situations where it doesn't work well, and we can talk about that in the questions if we want. The scaling beyond smallholder irrigation, there's really two aspects of that. When we think about smallholder irrigation, again, our framing is often cost-benefit analysis, and we get concerned about sustainability afterwards. So this concept of how do you do governance if you succeed and you have hundreds of thousands or millions of pumps is a problem. So this is really India's problem, that they have tens of millions of diesel and solar pump and electric pumps, each of which are individually owned and operated, and governance is impossible. Now, that solution isn't going to change if you have millions of pumps that are individually owned and operated, or it becomes very, very hard. However, if you have a water entrepreneur that's operating hundreds of pumps, the governance problem becomes a little bit easier because you can govern the entrepreneur. Governance goes through the water entrepreneur, and you can tie your payment to them through performance and through record keeping and reporting. And so there is, again, it gives me some hope that there are mechanisms that we haven't thought about that could operate. And then the other thing here is that I haven't talked about, I mean, we've talked about smallholders, but the math is the math. It's scale independent. And so this same kind of system could work and does operate with larger farmers that are in the tens of hectares of area. And so this isn't necessarily something that is only a smallholder solution. The picture there on the right is of a irrigation-as-a-service entrepreneur that uses solar pumps in Uganda. So again, these things operate at a variety of scales. So with that, thank you very much. And I know that Henning has been, I'm told, sharpening his teeth all night. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And thank you very much.
Sorry. Thank you, Nick. I really enjoyed the presentation more than the paper. That is, of course, because I am an economist with a very small e. And as an interdisciplinarian, I have economics as one aspect of my work. And my comments will focus more on some of the practicalities around the practices. I think you are, particularly in the presentation, have convinced me that the econometrics, you know what you're doing. And I think one of the problems I had with the version of the paper I got was that there were no illustrations. Yeah. The illustrations are actually very, very good. There was no illustrations, all the figures, and a little nice table about the concave and non-concave makes the results far more accessible. So that was one of my comments. So as you would have understood from my comments during the last 2 days, I'm very keen on we need new technologies to improve farmers' ability to increase their productivity and also push the boundaries, as I will be talking about in my own paper later on. We believe that with our approach, we have reached a limit to how far we can put gravity irrigation. Right? So we need We need a better way of distributing the water across the field. And I can certainly see it's appealing with rent for service, in the sense that it overcomes 3 critical issues associated with adoption of this kind of technology. The one is financial capacity to actually invest in this stuff. The other one is actually both skill and financial capacity to maintain it, and even just having access to the spare parts and somebody to repair it. So if you have an entrepreneur who knows what they're doing, then that stuff will be functional. The amount of equipment I have seen across Africa that are corroding away because some little part, or we give it to them and then we forget to tell them that the filter they need for it to get work costs $500, right? So the day the filter needs replaced, that's the end of it, right? So that, and the entrepreneur have to incorporate all of that in their decision making. So from that perspective, I love it. It's good stuff. But what I will talk about is not so much issues associated with your paper, about your econometrics, but some of the challenges that I see with the approach based on my experience of working with small-scale farmers in Africa, and which I would like to see discussed more in the paper. So one issue around, so you are talking here about mainly supplementary irrigation. The issue is, if you rely on supplementary irrigation, timing is absolutely critical, right? If that entrepreneur don't have the stuff when his lettuces or his spinach needs it, but 2 days later his spinach is dead, right? So, and I have seen that in other places, even in my own farming community where I live. Some of the big farmers have the harvesters, and then they start fighting with the people who want the service, because of course the guy who owns the equipment harvests his own field first, and then you have rain in between, and then the crop is lying down. So these rental services have a number of issues associated with it. The second one is access. There's none of the schemes I work on that would ever get that piece of equipment in there, right? Okay. So the road 30 kilometers out to the scheme is a bad road. Yeah. When you turn off the road down to the village, it gets really, really bad. From the village out to the field, it gets really, 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 really bad. Yeah. And once you get to the fields, there's no roads, right? Yeah. So if you have a major issue in one of our rice schemes that we facilitated, they got small harvesters. Yeah. That they are then owned by the community, and they then rent it. But to get that harvester to that field over there, he have to cross all the canals and the banks and the infrastructure to get into the last field. So if the first farmer have already planted, then the second farmer is destroying his crop. Yeah. So now they have all kind of issue about organizing who is planting first. And also this farmer have to, so this farmer down there should be planting first, but this farmer up here should be harvesting first, right? So that's, there's logistical problems in this. So that was a moment. Need my glasses. Anyway, so that are two of the main issues that I see with this, and so these systems have to be very, very context specific, and I see you acknowledge that. So, and I think your distinction between maximizing yield, maximizing profit, and maximizing asset utility is very, very good and need to be considered. And I think our extension service, even in the global north, don't understand that, right? I worked many, many years in southern Alberta, where we had huge farmers, big circular center pivot, and the extension officers, they keep pushing, and you need to put more water on. You have to maximize yield. And the farmers knew that one more round of irrigation with that thing costs thousands of dollars, and there's no way the increased yield is going to cover that cost. The farmers knew that, but the extension officers didn't care, because they needed good statistics. See, our farmers, they are now all the way up on the top of yield. So, and that also again raises the issue about what are you actually growing? Is that when profitability comes in? So maximizing your profit, it's a very, very important. It's something we are really, really pushing in our projects. So we don't any longer call it maximizing productivity. We are very carefully calling maximizing profitability, because that is a real thing. We have an example where not our project, but an NGO got our cabbage farmers to double their yield. And I sat in a meeting in Mozambique, and the German NGO, they were polishing their glory because they had really doubled the yield. And I could see the farmers over there. So I said to them, how comes that these guys are so happy and you look like doom and gloom? And they said, yes, we have doubled our profit. But in the meantime, everybody doubled their production. So now the prices are halved, but our cost of getting those cabbages to Maputo is now twice as high. So in effect, we are worse off. So that is a balance that and I think a lot of our research activity goes into maximizing yield rather than maximizing profit. So I think that's a really good point, and I think you illustrated particularly with graphs. Yeah. It becomes very clear. And I can certainly do 2 minutes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. So thank you for stopping me, because I can keep talking. So maybe we should open it up to discussion. And just one more thing about the donors that they can invest in this, and I can see they can control it and they overcome the problems that I just talked about. But they also have to make sure that the entrepreneurs they can select actually have both the financial and the technical capacity. Yeah. And one more thing I was going to say, so I have 1 minute. So some of the Indian border market you talk about, I haven't read Shah's newer work, but I've read his old work. And the interesting thing about some of these rental markets is that if the suppliers of these services are high, it works very well for the poor. If the supply is low, is the monopolistic, it's bad. And the other aspect of that particular renting market is that it often overcomes other issues around input, because often it's not only selling the water, it's also a share farming arrangement. Yeah. So often the small farmer provide land and labor, and the big farmer provide input and water, and then they share the profit. But again, the moral compass of the operator is quite critical for its success. Okay, hopefully somebody in the audience is more skilled in the mathematical stuff than I am over there. Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Let's see, 2 or 3 questions. And just in terms of moving forward, let's spend for the discussant 5 minutes for the discussant meeting, and then 5 minutes for questions. And then the discussant will also provide written feedback to the author, so that way we get more diverse.
Exactly.
Who is
Thank you, Nick. Very good and interesting presentation. My maybe suggestion more than a question is uncertainty. Small farmers, particularly small farmers, are risk averse, as most empirical work has shown, and mainly because of decreasing risk aversion. And if you filter in uncertainty, then water not only becomes an issue for profit, it also becomes an issue for risk management. Water has been found to be a risk-reducing input. Right. Yeah. And then it becomes quicker to have a portfolio than the jumping. So I think maybe you could look into, now you had complex solutions. This is going to make it even more complex. But I think that would be interesting.
Perfect. If I can respond to that quickly, yes. The uncertainty factors in a number of ways. One is the crop water functions themselves are stochastic, and that part can be factored in. But the issue of water as a risk-reducing input is absolutely correct. And I don't know. I'd have to think about whether. I mean, I chose not to do utility maximization here. It just adds another thing. But yeah, it's a really good thing to think about. And let me also say, I appreciate basically laid out at least some of the work that we're already doing in other contexts, and then about 5 more years of research. So thank you for that, Henning. So,
but I think the critical part is that some of these issues, and what you also mentioned, Guglielmo, is to get into the paper, you don't necessarily need to be in the equation, right? You can just discuss your equation in this context and say there are all of these issues that we need to take into account as well. And from a farmer's perspective, as you say, it's very complicated, and farmers don't know all the stuff that you know. So when they make the actual decision, is different.
We have another question here.
Around it that farmers are using too much water and how drought is more enough.
Yeah.
So probably they were decreasing return.
Yeah.
So this is something probably that decreasing return.
Okay.
So thank you all. You should catch me in the break, and I'd love to continue the.
Send Nick an email.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our second presenter is Getaw. Getaw is going to have an online presentation from Rwanda. Good morning, Getaw.
Good morning, Javi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear properly. All right. If you don't mind, you can please share your screen.
Okay, let me, but I'm not allowed. Can someone allow me to share?
Okay, then you have to allow multiple sharing. Yeah.
Or I send for Julia.
Yes, she's working on it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Perhaps Getaw,
Hello.
Yes, we hear. Before you talk, if you can just introduce yourself to the audience. And
Thank you, Javi, and yes, I introduce myself. My name is Getaw Tadesse. I work for Academia 2063, which is the Pan-African Policy Research Institution, headquartered here in Rwanda, Kigali, and we do have also regional office in Dakar. So we closely work with the African Union. We used to be part of IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, but we just grown up and then have our own African-wide Pan-African Policy Research Institution. So we work on food security, agricultural economics, food security, irrigation, and also we support the African Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program. We have a lot of programs on trade, agricultural trade, and intra-African agricultural trades, and all those things. So those are the backgrounds. I'm the director for one of the department on operational analysis, and I'm an agricultural economist by profession. I had over 20 years of research experience on this policy research related to agricultural economics. I think that's enough introduction. Okay, then with this introduction, I can proceed to my presentation. I'm presenting about the economic potential of small-scale irrigation in the Sahel with the case of Burkina Faso and Niger. This paper is extracted from a bigger research report that we collaborated with the FAO and Academia 2063 to identify areas for investment, small-scale irrigation investment in the Sahel with the Pro-Sahel project with a case study from Burkina Faso and Niger. I'll try to be presenting some of the findings. It's a very wide research project, but I will be brief on some of the findings. And I'm not sure whether that fits for the academic audience or not, but let me try my best. So in terms of motivation, I think the urgency for creating resilient food system has become more urgent than ever because of the widespread climate change and also the health issues and malnutrition issues. And it's very clear that the other issue is there is a need for bridging the gap between land and labor productivity. In Africa, I think for the last 2 decades, I think many African countries were successful in raising the land productivity because of improved varieties and because of fertilizers and all these things. But that doesn't really significantly improve the labor productivity because farmers are working, I think, maximum 4 months a year, and the others are dry seasons. Then I think the labor productivity has never improved as such. And then I think there is also a growing momentum, I think, for investment in irrigation by national, international, and also regional, global government and non-governmental institutions. And simply because they want to, create adaptation for climate change and also improve for labor productivity. We all know that economists know that labor productivity is highly associated with income, household income, and poverty, and all those things. So that's why there is a growing momentum. But the problem is, even if there are a lot of interest here and there, the actual investment on small-scale irrigation, especially in the Sahel region, is very low. It's partly because some people, they may think that small-scale irrigation may not be a bankable project. So those has created some motivation for us to look at how economical are small-scale irrigations in terms of economic terms and in terms of improving the livelihood and economic growth and all those things. So that was the idea behind. So the objective is very clear that we want to explore the economic potential of small-scale irrigation in the Sahel, using the case of Burkina Faso. More specifically, we want to study the feasibility, how visible are small-scale irrigations within at pixel level across the countries, in all the countries. And also we want to see how much is scalable, how much hectares of land can be feasibly and economically can be irrigated for small-scale irrigations. And also what's the impact? The ex-ante impact on economic growth, agricultural GDP, and also poverty reductions and all these things. Those are the things that we explored in this research project. And in terms of methodology, I think we use for feasibility study, we use the internal rate of return. We calculated the internal return using a series of steps with an integrated approach that consider both biophysical and socioeconomic factors. So in the first stage, what we do is we do some crop selection using a 10 by 10 grade level using a GIS approach. And then we do some analysis because this is a collaborative work with agronomists and engineers and also economists together. And so we did water availability and land suitability analysis at the same time at 10 by 10 kilometer grids. And then finally, we did some cost benefit analysis using data from existing schemes in terms of yields and costs and operational cost, investment cost, and all those things. That is how we calculated at pixel level for both countries. In terms of scalability, I think we also follow similar approach, but here, because scalability depends on the type of technology we apply. So that's one of the issue that matters for scalability. Are you using water pump, treader pump, or small reservoir, or communal river diversion? Because these have implication in terms of biophysical environments and all those things. So I think we did the scalability for the different technologies, the types of technologies, the motor pump, for treader pump, and small reservoir, and common river. And for this one, what we did is we did some environmental and demographic suitability analysis, because demography is critical for the type of technology to be expanded. And also we did the same as water availability analysis. And also we did some crop yield prediction for the different technologies using the SWOT model, the soil water analysis tool. And then the effect of expanding small scale irrigation on using some DREAM. I don't know how many of you know about the DREAM model. and we try to predict how the expansion of small-scale irrigation affects product prices at local and international based on the type of commodities and all these things. And finally, we do cost-benefit analysis, and then we determine the amount of populations that will be covered by the different technologies, and also the amount of areas that can economically, feasibly can be irrigated with the different technologies. And the third approach is the economic impact analysis that we did on productivity analysis of GDP, especially agricultural GDP and poverty and all this. For this one, I think I don't have time to explain detail, but we just generally what we use a CG, a computable general equilibrium model we applied, and that is to estimate how expanding irrigation can really imply on GDPs and agricultural productivities and all those for different sectors, for agricultural GDP, industrial GDP, and overall GDP by urban and rural areas, and a lot of implications. We use a general equilibrium with a social accounting matrix. Here in Academia 2063, we have a social accounting matrix for many African countries. So we just simply adapt that one for the computable general equilibrium. And then later on, we do some micro simulations to predict the impact on poverty. As you know, poverty has to be measured at household levels, then from macro to micro. So then we do some micro simulations. Probably we will explain it detail on the methodology later on. These are generally the methodology that we applied. So in terms of the results, I mean, if you look at this graph, shows the feasibility, the internal rate of return for Burkina Faso and Niger. And you see that the dark blue shows the most profitable area, which is very limited in most cases, with an internal rate of return greater than 50%, which is very huge. But most of the shaded regions show that they are very feasible with internal rate of return, positive internal rate of return. And it seems that in Burkina Faso, we have a lot of areas that are feasible for small-scale irrigation, but in Niger, it's very small. But still, I mean, we can see that the Niger one is more profitable than others. In terms of scalability, what we do, what criteria used is the application area. I mean, how many common areas can be irrigated with the different technologies, and then how much is the economic return, billions of US dollars per year, and also the rural population that can be reached by these technologies. So you can see some of, I mean, these figures indicate that the motor pumps has more potential than the other technologies. I think in terms of area and economic return, motor pump is more scalable than others. But in terms of population coverage, as we expected, the small reservoir is highly reachable for many millions of people. This because this is a small reservoir by private farmers, so it reaches out many farmers. So I think the choice is very difficult to make, but it showed us the scalability of small irrigation depends on the type of technologies we use. And in many cases, it seems that there are a huge potential for thermometer pumps, and the same as drill pumps, especially in Niger. And these are some of the figures. I think I don't want to go in details because the numbers are self-explanatory. In terms of impact, the exact impact, and what we do is we first estimate the impact on agricultural productivity. I mean, which is total agricultural GDP divided by the total land, is both for irrigated and non-rain-fed agricultures. And we also do two assumptions. The first assumption is a substitution. A substitution means the new irrigation will be used as a supplementary irrigation for the rain-fed. This is especially the case in the Sahel region. And the other assumption is that the irrigation might be used for irrigating during off seasons. So the expansion assumption and the substitution assumptions. If you look at the baseline, which is the business as usual scenario, in this scenario, I think the agricultural productivity in both countries is declining. I mean, the growth rate of agricultural productivity is declining, which is the case in most Saharan countries in recent times because of changes in climate change and other issues. But when we introduce these technologies like the small-scale irrigations, and the productivity increases positively and with a bigger percentage points. So that it shows that the contribution of this small irrigation for reversing the declining agricultural productivity growth rate in these countries. And as we expected, I think the motor pump has a higher effect than the other technologies. We do also look at how GDP can be, the GDP growth rate will be affected by the technologies. In many cases, I mean, the blue one is a baseline. The agricultural GDP, even if productivity is not increasing because of expansion of area and because of other production expansion, and the growth rate both in Burkina Faso and Niger is about 4.8 and 4.2%. That's the business as usual. But when we introduce these technologies or small scale irrigation with different technologies, and we see up to 5%, which is a little bit a higher percentage point, because this is a growth rate. This is growth rate effect. It's not the level effect, it's the growth effect. So the growth of agricultural GDP will be improved from 4.8 to 5% in Burkina Faso, for example. For Niger, from 4.2 to 5. I mean, the impact in Niger seems more robust and stronger than in Burkina Faso, which is expected because Niger is one of the driest country in the Sahel regions. We also looked at the impact of this small irrigation on the industrial GDP growth rate, and we see some significant difference. Unfortunately, the data showed that the growth rate for food processing industries is much smaller than the other industries, because of manufacturing and all those sectors grows faster than the food processing industries in both countries. But still, the introduction of irrigation, because of some multiplier effects, some trickle-down effects, and all these things, that has been captured through the general equilibrium, computable general equilibrium models, then they have some positive impact on the industrial growth, which is just like the multiplier and trickle-down effects. In terms of poverty, what we do is we just estimated the number of poor people that will be lifted because of the introduction of these technologies. So these are some of the numbers, that we have estimated on how many people can be lifted out of poverty because of introducing these technologies, of different technologies. As we expected, the motor pump has a higher impact, but that varies from country to country. And it seems in Niger, the impact is more robust and more stronger in Niger than in Burkina Faso, as we expected, because of the nature of or the context of the Niger economy. These are the number of poor people that will be lifted out of poverty. So I don't need to, the good thing maybe here is the effect is both at national and rural areas here. If you look at it, the national figures are much higher than the rural areas. This means that the irrigation can also contribute indirectly for the urban poverty reductions through market mechanisms and through creating job opportunities and through value chain developments and all those things. So that's what we realize from this backward and forward linkage models. In conclusion, I think there is a huge potential for economically feasible and scalable small irrigation in both countries. However, the potential depends on the type of irrigation systems or technologies that we apply. And also it varies, on how we use the technologies, whether we use for substitution or for expansion of irrigated areas. And also, it varies from countries to country. And Niger is more impacted by the small-scale irrigation than Burkina Faso. Investment in small-scale irrigation have significant contribution to both agricultural transformation and poverty reduction. Most rural development interventions, they have a challenge. Sometimes they solve the agricultural transformation, may not be contributing that much for poverty reduction. So small-scale irrigation development is proper. We can say it's a proper. And at the same time, it also contributes for economic growth because it provides potential for industrialization and all these things. This is just because of the multiplier and the trickle-down effects that's associated with increase in small-scale irrigation productivity, and that brings to creating demand and supply, affects both the demand and supply factors, and then increases market potentials and have a lot of the multiplier effect across the value chains. In terms of recommendation, I think more important is the expansion of small-scale irrigation. I think And it's possible to develop a bankable project, small-scale bankable projects that are feasible, I mean, economically, both for the private sector in terms of feasibility, as we have seen, in terms of the feasibility that we have a strong internal rate of returns. And also from the society perspective, I mean, investing on small-scale irrigation contributes for GDP growth and also poverty reductions. Those are some of the social objectives that many governments are fostering. And there are also possibility for improving the efficiency of the irrigation projects. I mean, we outlined some of the institutional interventions that are required to improve the efficiency of the irrigation. Because, and in this paper, we do have also reviewed the policies in both countries. What are the irrigation policies in both countries? And we identified some of the institutional constraints and institutional options that has to be undertaken in order to improve the efficiency of small irrigation in these countries. I think those are briefly what I have for my paper, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Getaw. Now we invited Nick to give a discussion.
Thank you, Getaw. So I'll try to keep my comments brief, following instructions from Christina. So first of all, thank you. I really enjoyed this paper. So overall, the paper is, and my comments, like Henning's, will be based mostly on the paper rather than the presentation. So this paper looks at the potential for small-scale irrigation in the Sahel, especially Burkina Faso and Niger. So there's two distinct contributions to the paper. One is there's an extensive review of irrigation and related policies in the two countries. And the second is this modeling and estimation of the potential impact of expanding small-scale irrigation across the two countries. And that modeling combines the biophysical and the economic components. It's a very comprehensive and thoughtful analysis. Again, there's a lot more detail in the paper. So to my comments. So first of all, generally with models, particularly as they increase in complexity, it all comes down to the assumptions. And so the assumptions and the framing are critical. In terms of the paper, I would have liked to see a little bit more in terms of structurally how the model was built. So I'm personally not familiar with the DREAM model. I would have liked to see a little bit more about how it was constructed and what are some of the key assumptions that go into the model. I was a little confused in places as to whether this was looking at surface water irrigation, groundwater irrigation, or both. I think it was surface water overall, but in a few places, groundwater was mentioned as something that was being modeled, and obviously borehole drilling is a major constraint in the region. You talk about motor pumps. I think you mean diesel and petrol pumps and not solar pumps, but that's kind of a question. And so I'd like to know, did you look at diesel pumps? Did you look at solar pumps? I think they probably should be handled differently. I was surprised that some of the results for treadle pumps and motor pumps were so similar, because fundamentally the way they get used and their ability to increase agricultural productivity is quite different. So I'm intrigued by that result. And then, of course, as a modeler, I'd like to know, when you look at your results, which of the parameters are the ones that have leverage in the results. So I'm always, when you have models with many parameters, you always want to know which of these models are the ones that really matter. I would have liked to see a sensitivity analysis or a treatment of uncertainty. So that's a very common, easy criticism or easy suggestion to make. So overall, in terms of, I love the presentation. I think it's a really important contribution. In terms of thinking about it as a manuscript paper, and I'll say I didn't have the context that it was from a larger report. I think you almost have two papers here. You have a very detailed review and history of irrigation development and policy in the countries. And then you have your CGE model and your feasibility analysis. And so at a high level, my feedback for taking this to a peer-reviewed journal article, and this is something with the editors, is you should probably pick one or the other, that you could get by with a policy review and a very lightweight analysis, or you could get by with reducing the background and the literature review if you provide a lot more detail on the modeling, which it sounds like you have, so that the model and the results can stand on their own in the peer-reviewed paper. But again, thank you. I really appreciate the work. I guess I'm going to hand back to Christina now Oh, I'm going to run the questions. Okay, I'm going to run questions. Okay. All right. So I'll run the session. I guess Slim's hand is up first, and then we'll go to Chanju, and then we'll come to Sylvester. All right, those are probably our questions then.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Getaw, for the presentation. Of course, we haven't got access to your paper, but the presentation gave us a good view of what you have done. My comment is that we are looking to Africa in an old-fashioned way. So we are still thinking about small-scale farmers while the world is moving. We are moving towards a world with less water, with higher technology, and yet we want to keep the same model of farms forever. So keeping small farms means we are getting out these farmers not of poverty, but a little bit better life. So why you don't think about a different paradigm where you think about larger farms, fewer farmers, more modern farms? They can create wealth, can use technology, and you can create the value chain with it. So one of the major problems with this scheme is that we are perpetuating poverty. We are not getting out of poverty. So this is my first comment. And my second comment is related to the use of water. I haven't seen any thing in your presentation talking about water governance, because you start with plenty of water, but then you land, we have the experiences all over the world, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, everywhere we have serious problems of water. It started with few farmers, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and then millions. This would not stop. So water governance is a very important issue to talk about. And then my last comment is an internal rate of return of 50%. This is, I mean, too high. I mean,
I'm not hearing. It's disconnected.
Yeah, so when you find an internal rate of return as high as that, I mean, you have to have a big question mark. Internal rate of return shouldn't be much higher than the real cost of capital. Thank you.
Getaw, would you like to take just a couple of minutes to respond to those comments, and then we'll get to other questions?
Okay, thank you. I think these are important comments. How long we should depend on small-scale farmers? I agree that we have to transform to the larger farmers, but I think that's the process, and it's very difficult to say anything. But still, I believe that given the technological innovation that's going on, I mean, from Asia and from elsewhere, it's possible to make the small-scale farmers more profitable, more attractive, and all those things. So I think until we get those large farmers through land consolidations and all those things, I think we're trying to make the smallholders more productive, more profitable, and more attractive. And also, I mean, the contribution for poverty reduction might be a bit controversial, whether large farm is better or small farm is better. That is something debatable, but for the time being, yes, we agree we have to move towards building larger farms. But still, until we get there, I think we have to contribute for the productivity and profitability of smallholder farmers. The other one is water governance. I completely agree that it's very critical. We also did some papers on that, but that's not part of this paper, the water governance, in terms of whether there's collective governance or water committee, or whether it's private governance or the joint venture between public and private, and all those things. We did some analysis on water governance, but that's not part of this paper, but they are also important. And then internal rate of return, you are right. I mean, 50% is too much, but we do have very, very small areas, very few areas that has 50% and above. And most of them are just about 10% to 20%. So I think it's also showed that because those areas are highly, they need more waters, and any drop of water is more profitable in those places because of the nature of the places. And these are dry areas. These are my response. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. So Tenjo, I'd ask you to just one question, very brief, so that we can then try to get Sylvester and Abdullah in. So.
Thank you, Dr. Tadesse. I have a question regarding the time span in your analysis. You mentioned the CG modeling part and party reduction. I was wondering whether that's a single year static CG modeling or it's a recursive dynamic multi-year modeling. And that also linked to our question about the 50% IRR. So over how long period this can continue with the investment, described in the scenarios. Thank you.
Yes, may I respond? I mean, for the CGE, we use 10 years dynamic CGE for 10 years. We just predicted for 10 years because we assume that this investment can be, more productive for the coming 10 years. And then we calculated the annual growth rate based on that. So the planning period is 10 years for the CGE. For the internal rate of return, it varies from technology to technology, but most of them we did a project life of 7 to 10 years. Some of them, the minimum is 7 years, and the maximum is 10 years project life. With that, we calculated the internal rate of return. Probably that might have, as you said, implication on the IRR.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the microphone to Sylvester here.
Quick one. Thanks for the very good presentation. My question is related to the first comment from Slim, and it's also linked to the comments made by the chair, I think 2 days ago. Africa has been exposed to different technologies. However, our smallholder farmers are still struggling financially. They are not, generating enough income. They are not even improving their livelihood and so on. And this is my problem because we adapted technologies from other regions across the globe. We've also developed our own. Why is the situation remain, the same? Over and above that, I would appreciate if you can also look at issues related to water allocation, and I will justify why I'm raising this. In the SADC region, including in South Africa, you find that, there are different irrigation schemes. But in terms of water allocation, those who are farming close to the canal system, they get more water compared to somebody who's farming 20 or 50 kilometers away. And this has got major implications in terms of production, in terms of generating income, in terms of producing high quality products and so on. What is the best strategy in order to address, such kind of things in order to balance the scale? Thank you.
I don't know. Should I respond or?
Yes, you can respond.
Yeah, it's very, this is about water governance. We're back to the water governance. How best we allocate it and how best we manage the water resource we have. And that is something I think we didn't look at in our study, but I believe that that's important issue to look at it in the future.
Perfect. Getaw, thank you so much. We are out of time, but thank you for your presentation, and hopefully we can acknowledge that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk to one of the issues that we have mentioned quite a few times here, and that is the issue of projects and interventions to improve agriculture often receive results while the project exists, and then when the staff of the project and the money of the project leaves, we are back to square one. So what I will try to argue is, or present, is an approach we took over 10 years in Africa, and how we believe that that facilitated sustained change. And that sustained change is what we need if we want to see climate smart agriculture and if we want to increase farmers' adaptive capacity to climate change. What is it? Like the 1 in 3 machine. So it's based on 10 years of work on the project transforming small-scale irrigation in Southern Africa. We worked in 3 countries. We initially worked on 6 schemes, which soon became 5 because of a major flooding that wiped away one of the schemes. It gives us an opportunity to analyze the issue that I talked about, because during the first phase of the project, 4 years, we worked intensively in 5 schemes. Project staff was there very intensively, and all the money went to relatively few farmers. So what the funding agency then asked us to do was to outscale this to see, is this replicable? So the next phase, we worked with now 45 schemes, I think, and farmers with about the same amount of money. We basically left the first schemes, not entirely, but we transitioned the roles of our field staff to local stakeholders, and there was no more monetary input on it in that sense. So in a sense, the second phase, these schemes transitioned from what we call a project scale to an operational scale. But we continue to monitor them at the end of the 10 years to see what had happened during the second phase. We collected a number of data. We made 3 major household surveys in the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. For more detailed analysis of farmers' productivity, we had a subgroup of farmers maintaining field books where they took note of everything they did, which input they purchased and how they applied it, and how much they harvested and what they were selling it for, which facilitated quite reliable yield estimates and quite reliable gross margins, which are critical factors in our analysis. In addition to that, we have a lot of qualitative data from our focus group, workshops, observations by our field staff going in there several times. So we have our hypothesis, our theory of change was that if we both introduce social, institutional, and technological innovations, they will work synergistically to trigger various cycles of improvements. So individual farmers and organizations will gain the confidence to innovate and to make change, achieve agency. And farmers, in doing that, farmers will start to demand more appropriate policies and support services from government and agencies. So that was our hypothesis, that was our theory of change. And if you achieve that, then yes, long-term outcome should emerge on farmers' livelihood on a number of livelihood parameters. We took what we call a 2-pronged approach. Can this one also point? The right? Yeah. So the agricultural innovation platform, which we introduced as a focus for learning and innovation and identifying problems. We introduced as a first intervention soil moisture monitoring tools, which facilitated farmer learning around soil moisture and fertilizer dynamics for better irrigation decision-making. Doing that increased yield. The AIP also increased access to improved quality of input and better market linkages, and combining that with increased yield gives more profit. In addition, the AIP introduced higher value crops, better market integration, linkages, processing, and that further helped increase yield to increase profitability. So that was our approach, that was our hypothesis. And then we believed that we could transform underperforming schemes to functional and sustainable irrigation schemes. So the AIP is basically a participatory platform where you bring together all the stakeholders that is involved, the farmers, extension officers, district council, economic officers and development officers, input suppliers, output buyers, etc. They go through a process of a visioning. They first actually draw a physical map of their scheme and identify this is our scheme today. and we draw it, and here are all the issues that are affecting our productivity. Then they're asked to dream and vision, where should our scheme be in 5 years? So they make a new drawing about how they vision their scheme to be in 5 years. Then they start looking at what are the barriers? What will prevent us from reaching our objective? And then they start talking about also what are the solutions to these barriers? What do we have to do? And the next question is, who can actually do that? Who can lead the process of implementing that intervention that is needed? And then they prioritize the intervention that is needed, in which order should we address our issues, and then they go about doing it. So most of the constraints that was identified are not rocket science. It was quite constant throughout the schemes, but the particulars about the issue was very different. One of the things that comes up, a very critical one, was conflict. These irrigation communities, there's a lot of conflict over water access. Those downstream don't get the water because those upstream, you know all of that. So, but also over payment of fees. So these infrastructure don't work. Farmers don't want to pay. They don't want to participate in maintenance. So conflicts are a major barrier to collective actions that are needed in order to transition schemes to functional schemes. And a lot of institutional constraints, and I will talk more about them later. So here are some of the actions that the AIP took, and I talked about the first two of them. One process we did that was proven very, very important was participatory mapping. We went with the farmers and the stakeholders and some students from nearby universities with their GPS, and the two neighboring farmers walked along the boundary, and they agree. If they don't agree, time is set aside for them to clarify what the boundary is. So that has, and also in the process, there was not only the farmers, but also other stakeholders. So a lot of other issues were identified, like that farmer up there, his land management practices actually flow into this farmer's now here alkalinity and salinity and waterlogging. So a very important function of this was that issues, it comes to what area called awareness in the opening of mine. So what problems that probably most people knew were not collective knowledge. There was not a collective awareness, but this process made it collective knowledge, and thereby from that emerged a collective responsibility for solving it. And that was quite a critical, but also because they now knew how big their plot was and how big is my neighbor's plot. So why do I have to pay more or less than he does? In the past, it was based on estimates, and an estimate you can query, and people know what, but they trust in the math. So that was a very farm and scheme level business plan. So we get some local business consultants and NGOs involved in developing business plan. Soil test was a very important part. A lot of the farmers believed that they didn't need to give fertilizer, their soil was fertile. But when they get the soil results, they knew that it wasn't. So a lot of them started to apply fertilizer. Demonstration plots, we used a farmer approach to that. A lot of the more progressive farmers actually use their farms as demonstration plots, which is a very important farm. So we had a lot of focus on farmer-to-farmer learning, which actually also engaged the extension officers more. And once you remove a lot of the conflict, so the fact that farmers actually now only used half the water because of the use of the tools, the conflict was reduced because of the mapping, the conflict over fees was reduced. So the willingness to engage in collective action increased quite considerably. And start, but when the farmers learned that there's profit in that water, as soon as I realized that, oh, why don't I get it? We need to fix that canal because I need to make more money. We also, through the AIP, identified or engaged the higher level of governments, not we, but the AIP did. It's important. From you Africans, there was no Umzugus in these meetings, right? There was no white guys. It was only the local. We managed to negotiate about increases in inlet and allocation in some of the schemes. There was a major conflict over an unpaid water bill in Zimbabwe because it was unreasonable. So we managed to get the people from Harare to come down and face the irrigators, and they understood the problem, and a deal was negotiated. In Tanzania, we got an arrangement with both the local and the federal government about co-financing a storage shed and the rice mills. The farmers are now not selling paddy, they're selling milled rice, and they can now store the rice until prices increased. There's some financing built into that because now there's a formal storage. They can get a receipt that I have that rice at this value. It can be taken to some lending institutions to finance them until it's more profitable to sell. So these things are very, very important. And in Zimbabwe, we got two major things taken down. The rigid supply of water every Thursday disappeared. And the demand to grow certain crops of certain types of the year, that cropping calendar had been on the wall since 1970 something when the farm was built. It was very formally taken down the wall. So now farmers could grow whatever in response to market signals, not in response to what is on the calendar. So here are the tools. There are two simple to use tools, not simple to produce, as Mr. Stursacker will tell you, if you by accident say they are simple tools, took 10 years to develop them. So it's the chameleon, and it's a full stop. The chameleon measures soil tension, soil water tension at 3 different levels in the soil. So 20 farmers literally get those, and each scheme got 2 of these, which is the chameleon, because it changes color with the soil moisture at different soil levels. So they can, and then the scheme had 2 of these things that they shared, and with that they can be connected to that one, and they get a color for each soil depth that indicate whether the soil is dry, wet, or about right. So it's more informed, better informed decision making. This fellow here is called a full stop. He collects water samples at different levels of the root zone. Once there is a soil water sample, this one pops up, and the farmer can extract the soil water through a hose and a syringe and analyze it for nitrogen. So the 2 tools in combination, so the farmers learned that with this fellow, the chameleon was blue all the time. If they put fertilizer on here, almost immediately all the nitrogen was down there. They could measure the soil moisture. They took the soil moisture up, and they had little nitrate strips, and they could see, that's my plant food. What is it doing down there? My plant can't eat it, right? So then very quickly it informed far better decision making. So farmers learn very, very quickly. If you give them a tool that really means something that has impact on their income and their yield, they learn very quickly. So this is how farmers changed the way in which they irrigate, mainly by the frequency of irrigation event and also the duration of irrigation event. So by the end of the 6-year period, 80% had changed the way in which to make irrigation decision and how long, how frequently irrigate.
80% of the farmers use code.
80% of the farmers that was interviewed, that was 80% of the farmers interviewed. So we interviewed, depending on the size of the scheme, but up to 80 to 90% of farmers were interviewed. Yeah. So that's something that really shows you that if you give farmers meaningful tool that has an impact on their livelihood, they adopt technology like no tomorrow. Like they have adopted mobile phones, right? In Africa. Here are the change in irrigation frequency. This is from Mozambique. We can see how they irrigated every 9 days. And this is every 18 days. Rather quickly. They now understand that by irrigating too much, they're leaching the fertilizer down below the root zone. And we can see the 2 different columns, those with and those without the tools. Oh, yes, Moses. Okay. So these schemes are built as supplementary irrigation schemes, but by getting them water every day or every week regularly, they are turned into irrigation schemes. 80% of the water came from irrigation originally, and 20% from rainfall of all the stuff on the. And then it became 50-50, and now 80% of the water that the plant absorbs is from rainfall, and only 20% from irrigation. So by giving them the right tools, the right information, they make the right decisions. So here we see changes, and that's green maize meal from Mozambique. See significant increases, and the light green color is the farmers that had the tools, and the dark green ones are those who didn't have the tools. So originally, those who didn't get the tools had a better yield than those who got the tools. And then that changed, but we can see how farmer-to-farmer learning between those with the tools and without the tools had a significant impact, because those without the tools also increased their yield. This is a water productivity per unit of water. And we can see originally they just irrigated when they got the water, and the productivity per unit of water was low. Then they learned through the chameleon that it didn't need to irrigate. So the water productivity per unit of water increased substantially, and the leaching of fertilizer reduced because they gave less water. So therefore, the productivity increased. So sustained change, we interviewed farmers in 2017 and again in 22, on how frequently they irrigated. So every 7 days became every 15 days. And instead of 4 hours, there were 2 hours. And in the second period, it became 1.4 hours. So even after the period where the project were intensively involved in these schemes, they continue to learn, they continue to change. It didn't stop them from, they have really learned that this stuff, what they have been telling us to do, really changed our life, changed our income. We also gave the farmers field book as a way for them to learn and follow. So at the end of each season, they meet, all those who have the farmers field book, and they discuss what have I been doing, what was my profit, what was my gross margin, allowed them to compute gross margins. So the farmer interaction about their practices and what the result was. So sustained change, so these are the changes of a number of parameters over the first 3 years. And this is how that continued during the period where the project largely retracted. So we did cause sustained change and a process that continued. And we just had final review after 10 years, and the reviewers kept asking the farmers, but you're not going to continue to do that. All projects in the world tell you that as soon as a project disappears, you stop doing the right thing. And then they pointed outside the window, and he saw all the new brick houses and tin roofs, and he had not seen a dairy shed. But I couldn't convince. In the end, farmers actually got angry. The guys told them they were going to go back to their old ways as soon as the project disappeared. So this is quite interesting because that talks about the female and male farmers. See the gross margin for the male farmers, how it increased. During this period, female farmers increased the gross margin by 34%, male farmers by 7% in one scheme. In the other scheme, female farmers increased gross margin by 42% and male farmers by 21%. Right? That is quite an interesting result. So in our experience, female farmers are far more aggressive in this stuff because they're responsible for the kids and the food and all the other things. And the male farmers are far more conservative in adopting new practices and new crops. So this is basically the loop, and I won't have time to go into it, but it's how the two different approaches influence different things and how they feed into each other. I'm afraid I'm running out of time, but the tools really learn them how much water led to decreased irrigation. That means they have to save the day a week, right? That they certainly put into other activities. And so they invested that, some invested it in weeding. So the available soil water was increased for the crops. Others invested at the same time in other livelihood opportunities that resulted in increased income that they then could invest in more input. So it's kind of two circles that if you reduce water use, you reduce nutrition leaching, you increase the crops, the yield, and you decrease the amount of time farmers are spending. So in most of these schemes, giving one round of irrigation is 1 day. They might only irrigate for 3 hours, but it takes them 2 hours to walk there. And often they have to go back to feed the family, and then they come back again. At the end of the day, they have to walk 2 hours again back home. So it's a major change. What did you say? It's time's up. Okay. So here are just some conclusions. A really important one is if you change the mindset of farmers and scheme management, and you will have to ask the remaining questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And here's a little advertising. We will have the next World Water Congress in 2 years in Durban. The institution that I'm vice president of the International Water Resources Association. Undue advertising. Anyway.
Thank you. Getaw is the discussant. I don't know whether he's still online. Getaw, can you hear us?
Yes, Javi. Yes, I'm here.
All right. You are invited to proceed.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to read this interesting paper. I enjoyed reading it. And it's a well-written paper and more qualitative. It has a lot of stories. And thank you, Professor, and the co-authors. And I see two important contributions from this paper. The first on the linkage, the synergy between technological innovation and institutional innovation. That's where we fail in most development projects, because in some cases we have a good institutional arrangement, but we don't have technologies. And in some cases we do have some very innovative technologies, but they don't have the institutional arrangement. So we have seen that one in many studies before, but this is a new application for irrigation. We have seen it in farmers' cooperatives in some cases, and also the introduction of mobile phone in Africa. That was not supported by institutional innovation, and then the mobile phone was not productive. Those are some of the literatures we have from previous studies, but this one is a good example on irrigation. And this is one contribution. The other one is and then on the effect on farmers' behavior. I mean, farmers' behavior. This is sort of the impact on behavioral impacts of these things. And the paper tried to capture some of the behavioral impacts in terms of changing their practices, in terms of changing their communications and learning among farmers and all those things. So these are the two most important contributions I can see from the paper. But also, I think for me, I mean, commenting on this paper is a bit difficult because this is more a qualitative type of study, and it tells us intuitions and stories and all these things. Those are really appealing, but my background is on quantitative issues, so might be a bit difficult. I want to see the synergy, because the most important aspect of this paper is the synergy. That synergy effect is not clearly come out from the analysis. I mean, how much the technological innovation has contributed, how much in the institutional, when they are together and when they are separate and all those things. That might be some of the area where we can look. We want to see more often. So the synergy effect has to come out in the analysis clearly. And the other one is the attribution. I think I don't expect because this is not a random control trial or maybe an impact, a quantitative impact study, but still we should attribute some of the impact. Whether, I mean, we have seen some changes in terms of farmers' behaviors. We have seen some changes in terms of maize yield between with tools and without tools. And also, I mean, those might be one area where we can really do some attributions, whether that is really because of the tools, or that is really because of the platform, the institutional, the innovation platform, all these things. And those are some of my comments. And I see in some graphs, there is a water efficiency. I mean, productivity, water productivity. It was low in the first year, and then high in the second year, and then decline down. I don't know why that is the case. And what does that explain? What's the explanation for that? That's one area where we can comment on that. And also the disparity between the gross margin analysis between male and female. I think, Professor, you have said that maybe because the males are producing more food crops and the male are cash crops, but there might be also another explanation in terms of like resource allocation, time allocations, and all these things. Those might be more interesting stories to tell. For these disparities, because I think this is clearly an indication where we have to work more on these gender issues on irrigation. So those are my comments I have briefly, and maybe we'll further discuss later on with the written comments. Over to you, Javi.
Thank you. Thank you, Getaw. Because Getaw is not physically here, we can just take a few questions and we proceed to our program. If you want to react to...
Yes. This paper has a phenomenally big scope, and there is at least 30 peer-reviewed publications underlying that presentation. And I already have to take another 3 or 4 pages out of the paper to go down to the journal's requirements. So most of what you are talking about has been analyzed, and I will see and look at how we can incorporate it better within the limit of the paper. So this has kind of been trying to make an overarching paper for the project on this particular issue about whether sustained change, and it relies heavily on references to other papers. So I had to be very, very choosy about which particular elements of our findings that I put emphasis on in the paper. And most of this stuff that you are talking about have been analyzed. And I will be very pleased to see your written comments, and I will see what you think are the critical points that are missing, so I can see how to massage it in. I have already decided what I'm going to take out to reduce the number of pages to the journal's standard. So thank you very much for the comments. I will definitely endeavor to include more of that within the final version.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for this really interesting project. It's very exciting to kind of hear this, comprehensive approach to think about not only technology adoption, but how it really impacts the lives and livelihoods of people. I'm kind of curious specifically about some of the irrigation technology, working a lot with soil moisture sensors in California. We've seen some very significant challenges with the sensitivity of these soil moisture sensors and, kind of ongoing maintenance challenges as well, being put in different areas of the fields, very different soil conditions. How have you accounted for some of these sensitivities, and what has the ongoing maintenance of these technologies looked like? Thank you.
It's a very, very good question. Oh,
what do you prefer?
I'm an old man. I can't remember all. These are very critical issues, and we did not invent. The guy who invented it was on the first part of our project, and he's still working on it. And I know the Water Research Commission in South Africa have been very much involved, and there are still major issues with these tools. Because the farmers so where in the field am I going to put? So we told them where to put it, and then they start learning. They are so fast, right? So they immediately want to know what is the soil moisture down the end of the furrow and what is up in the front, and then they start putting those things out of the ground, and then they break. And we are still struggling with how to get this stuff into certain countries, like in Tanzania. They whack 40% on it or something. They are quite cheap. They are affordable. When we ask them, they're willing to pay more than the cost of producing them. We are currently producing them in South Africa, in Pretoria, a factory that we are not involved in. It's a commercial side of the project. That's a challenge. But I think the important thing, even some of the schemes now only have 1 or 2 tools left, but it has not changed the way they irrigate. So it's also an initial learning tool. As soon as farmers get the grist that I'm losing my plant food, right? And I can hardly afford to buy it in the first place, and then I put too much water on it down below the root zone. And that's a very, very critical learning. And very few of them have actually, they haven't gone back to their own ways, even though the tools don't work anymore. So we see it very much as a learning tool for farmers to get to understand the dynamics between watering and fertilizer application. So very few of them are going back, as you could see on the table. Even after we left, they continue to reduce the length and they experiment with how many siphons to use and where in the field to put them. And so that the long-term use of the tool, yes, we are working with producers and CSIO very hard, on finding ways of getting it to people and getting it produced and get somebody to service it. Because when you start pulling them in and out of the soil, things are happening.
It's just a clarification question.
Yeah.
Did the irrigation technology change or was it constant? I mean, did you give them irrigation at the beginning as well, or was it constant throughout?
No.
Yeah.
To the farmers' great frustration, we didn't actually give them anything. As soon as a project come in, they say, where's a tractor? Where's a truck? There was none of that. They got that tool to facilitate learning. They had the irrigation, and all of it is quite old-fashioned furrow and drip furrow irrigation. And one in Mozambique, they use a diesel pump. The other one is run-of-the-river stuff. And we have now reached the point we believe that we cannot improve the efficiency of flood irrigation and furrow irrigation any further. We see people who are pumping water and paying for diesel actually have pushed it in some instances too far, so they now start getting red reading from the chameleon, saying it's too dry because diesel is very expensive. But the others are all on run of the river flow.
Thank you. All right. Maybe.
Quick observation. You, in one of the slides, you had a bullet, I think very important one, but you did not develop on that farmers learned from farmers.
Yeah.
First of all, how did you measure it? And second of all, what mechanism did you introduce to promote that in the project?
So the farmer-to-farmer learning is evidenced by the fact that we gave the tools to 20% of the farmers. In the end of 10 years, 80% have changed their timing and the duration and the timing of the irrigation. So even though we only gave it to 80% during the project started reducing the length and the spacing between events. So that for us is farmer-to-farmer learning. And the project teams were never out there. They haven't seen an Umsugu, except in our once or twice during the 10 years we showed up and talked to the farmers. But it's learning by the local staff, by our local project staff, and between the farmers. So a lot of the farmers we had running these test plots I talked about were introducing new farming practices, new fertilizer application methods. It was one of the farmers that ran the test plots. It's very active involvement. And the extension farmers, the extension officer loves it because now they get challenged, which they've never been before. The farmers want answers. Why does my chameleon do like this? Why? So that is a dynamic process. And therefore, it's actually very difficult to disintegrate what's the impact of the tools and what's the impact of the EAP, because the two things are very integrated. And that's why these tools have been...
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It has been really great. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you.